Good evening, everybody. Jay Klodek here. Thought I'd give you a update on the build of the Space 1999 22-inch Eagle test shot. Work has been going kind of slow, mainly because I've had a couple other things I've been working on at the same time, but this weekend has been the first weekend I've been able to devote a fair amount of time to working on this model. And you can see in front of you the sum total of my construction efforts. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Jay, what about the cockpit pod? What about the leg pods? What about the cage? Well, yeah, those are important, but since I do not have the aluminum engine bells, which are going to be available as an aftermarket kit for this model, I'm having to work with the plastic ones, and as a result, these are going to have a metallic finish put on them, and the better prep work you do to your plastic, the better looking the results are going to be with any natural metal finish, be it polished metal or aircraft aluminum, that type of thing. So, in any event, we've got the two-piece engine bells here, technically three-piece if you consider the fact that there's also a little set of engine baffles that go inside. Then we've also got a combination of the VTOL motors for both the Eagle transporter and what goes on the bottom of the pod. I believe the larger ones go on the pods and the smaller ones go on the front and rear section of the Eagle transporters. In addition to that, I've also got the RCS thruster quads that go on the ends of the leg pods. Slow, tedious work, and well, how tedious? Well, I do highly recommend that when you're building a kit like this that you invest in a decent quality set of sprue cutters, such as these ones from Xuron right here. But at the same time too, when you cut plastic off the parts trees, you do not want to cut right up to the surface. Reason being is you might cut into it and mar it, and then you've got a little area that you've got to fill. So the best thing to do is to cut the sprue nubs, leaving, the way I did it is I would usually cut about maybe about 5 millimeters off from each engine bell in order to get them free, and then once I cut them off and the tension was released off of the sprue tree, then I would cut closer, leaving only maybe about 2 millimeters of sprue. And then from there I would go to utilizing a knife and or sandpaper to polish it off. Now, as I said, the more surface prep you put into these, the better they're going to look. And with these engine bells, it's very tricky to pull that off because you do have a certain amount of detail on there that you don't want to remove accidentally. There's like a little bar, raised bar right there, and then there's some additional stuff on top. But took a fair amount of work, but I got them off, I got them polished. Glue of choice that I've been using is Ambroid Pro-Well, the liquid solvent glue, which does seem to be discontinued. Can't get it anymore, but I've got a reasonable amount of it stashed away. But similar glues that I've also used include 10X7R and Plastruct Plastic Weld, which comes in the orange bottle. Do not get the stuff in the white bottle, which is known as Bondine. That one contains a little slower acting chemical. It'd probably work okay, but you want something with a methylene chloride based chemical that kind of kicks a little quicker. And the bonds are incredibly strong. These bells are nice in one piece. As far as the inside, okay, yeah, there is a seam on the inside, but these little baffle plates, once they fit in there, it's going to disguise it very well. Another nice benefit of the Eagle transporter is the inside of the engine bells were pretty much all flat black to prevent reflections back into the camera from the light sources that they're using. So, next step for these guys, primer coat. Polish that down, and then give it a spray of flat black on the inside of the bells and gloss black on the outside. And after I've laid down the gloss black, depending on how good I laid it down, might need to do a little polishing with some polishing cloths, but after that I'm going to apply Alclad polished aluminum to the bells and the engine and the rocket thrusters. That should do the job. Let's talk about the engine bells for a little bit, specifically the VTOL thrusters that go on both the bottom of the pod and the bottom of the Eagle cage structures. Again, two-piece assemblies made out of styrene. I tried to make sure that when I cut them, like the bigger bells, that you had a big sprue nub and then smaller sprue nubs, which would be cut down, and that way I wanted to make sure I didn't flush cut too close to the surface to damage the edges of the engine bells. I do know that these particular parts had some reasonably large sprue gates for their size. Now, whether that'll change on the production kit, I don't know. But I was able to overcome it, and using my sanding papers and sanding sticks and flat edge rat tail files, I was able to come up with a nice set of engine bells, and believe me, it took a long time to get these done. I am very meticulous. You want to check your work, especially where, as I said, natural metal finish comes into play. But the results speak well for how good the quality of the kit is. One thing I do like on this design is, okay, you got the engine bell and you got the base plate. A little bit of a seam on the inside, but once everything's painted, that's not really going to be visible. Now, these are going to be replaced completely by aluminum engine bells on the aftermarket set. So if you invest in one of those sets, yes, it will save you some work. But if you really want a nice challenge, go ahead and paint up a set of the plastic engine bells, or if you're also working on a budget. One of my Eagles down the road might make use of the aluminum engine bells, but I'm gonna push the envelope and see how close to realistic metal I can get on these. Apparently with Alclad you can get pretty doggone close. Well, we're going to find out how close. One thing I do recommend is the alignment pegs for the engine bells to the base plates, particularly on the smaller units. Would not be a bad idea to sand the alignment pins down just a little. That way you don't end up with like a 32nd of an inch gap between the bell and the base plate. I went ahead and did that on all these, and that way they fit nice and flush. Now they may fix that on the production version, I don't know. But if they don't, just be aware of it. Just be aware that you may have to do that work. But in any event, I really like how these are turning out, and next time you see them, they'll have Alclad on them, and we'll see how successful I was. Let's talk a little about the RCS thruster quads. Now, these are rather prominently displayed on each of the outer leg pods, and the way round 2 was molded them, you've got a center boxy structure, and each of these RCS engine bells is molded as a separate piece that is glued to this center box unit. That's probably the best way to do it. I mean, some people might say, well, couldn't they have molded them as one piece? Well, not exactly. Not if you want to get that nice deep cone structure in there. But just want to give you a heads up that there's probably going to be a fair amount of work involved, and I've come up with a couple of tips to help you with that when the production kits come out. First thing I'll make mention of is that the box itself, one thing I noticed on the test shot parts is there was a rather prominent seam between the top and the bottom halves. As you can see, it's hollow on the inside. There was a pronounced step and seam there. Hopefully the modifications being made to the test shot will help correct that or help reduce that. But in order to fix that, I had to do a fair amount of work with flat files and a little bit of sandpaper periodically. Now, when you're doing this type of work, you don't want to necessarily sand indiscriminately, otherwise you might turn your flat boxy part into something with an ever so slight curve. But just work carefully, try to maintain the shape, and eventually you'll reduce it. Check your work periodically, and don't just look at it head on. Also hold it up to the light and see how light reflects off the surface. Other thing I'll make mention of is on the center part of each of these thruster quad boxes, there was a little bit of a depression there, just where plastic kind of cooled a little different rate and pulled away from the surface. Hopefully, again, the production model will take care of that, but if there is that problem, just use some lightweight filler and that will take care of it. In my case, I used a bottle of Bob Smith Industries brush-on CA glue. Just brushed on a little onto the part, hit it with a little bit of activator, and once it was dry, it was just a matter of going over it with a sanding block to sand it flush. Then I polished it out, of course, with a finer grit of sandpaper to just inspect the work. There's a little bit of a shiny spot that I can see where the glue is. Now, it's very important when you use super glue as a filler, do your sanding relatively quick after application. Reason being is that for about the first, I'd say 11 to 12 hours, the glue is going to be we'll sand it about the same rate as the plastic. After that, the glue will get harder than the plastic, and it will kind of start to gall out, and things are not going to behave quite like as it should. So this is the reason why I only use super glue or CA glue as a relatively quick and dirty filler. If I'm doing anything more substantial where I need to use a lot more material, then I go to Milliput or some other filler putty. Now the engine bells, as I said, each one of them is glued on individually. And again, I used my Ambroid Pro Weld plastic weld glue to glue these on. Now, if you look close at these two thruster quads, actually this one's just like the other two over here. This thruster quad right here, if you look close, you will notice that I've still got some sprue nubs on the back of these RCS engine cones. Reason being is that trying to clean those off, those little engine bells, when they're just being held in the palm of your hand, is almost impossible. You could also make a jig of some kind. You could probably put a little pusher putty on the end of a pencil and put each one on there. But in my opinion, the best way to tackle cleaning these engine bells up is to just glue them to the boxy structure. Let the glue dry and set up. Maybe in about an hour or so you might be able to work on it. Just be aware that the engine bells might still be ever so slightly soft, so you want to be careful not to let them distort out of shape. Now, of course, you've got 4 of these little engine bells that you got to worry about. One little handy dandy thing that I found that worked for me is getting one of these big X-Acto clips, which I've had in my possession since the early 1980s. Actually, I think even late 70s. What I did was I just gap spaced it like so and used it as kind of a squaring jig to make sure that the bells would be nice and square to the boxy structure. And it worked out pretty well. I had to do a little minor maneuvering. Of course, I did 3 engine bells like that. When the glue set up okay, then all I did was pull the unit out and then flip it over, glue the last engine bell on, and put it on. And the results were pretty good. I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I mean, it was just a nice, quick and dirty little jig, and it did the job. The beauty of it is if you do notice that an engine bell is ever so slightly out of place or slightly crooked, you can brush a little bit of plastic weld on there, let it soak in for maybe about 2 or 3 minutes, and then twist the engine bell until it's about in the right spot. So, like I said, glue the engine bells on first before you clean the majority of the sprue off. It'll be a lot easier than trying to clean up each engine bell separately. And you're less likely to lose a part too, by the way. Well, let's talk a little about the landing pods, because I've also got some work done on parts of those. Each landing pod structure is made up of, well, you've got the floor of the landing pod, which is this. Then you've got sidewalls. These here are like the inner sidewalls with a protrusion that sticks out that goes into the cage structure. These are the outer ones right here where the each RCS thruster quad unit goes. And by the way, yes, another reason why it's a good idea to put the little sprue nubs all on one side of the RCS is that way if you do screw up the engine bells, your work will be obscured because they'll be on the back side of the engine bells on the walls right there. But anyway, these are the outer walls. These are the inner walls. These here are a couple of detail pieces that go on front and rear of each pod. And then inside you've got the stem, and then you've also got part of the cage structure that goes on the bottom of the pod where the landing gear stalk, as it were, goes through. But all that work to build one of these, and you ultimately end up with a structure that looks about like that. There you got the outer piece. That's the back wall. That's the front. Now, one thing I can't emphasize enough is that when you're working on these pods, because basically you've got 1, 2, 3 pieces that can be built in different configurations depending on what pod you're building, plus a different sidewall, it's a good idea to mark which pod you're working on. So on the inside of this one, I've marked it front starboard. Done the same thing on this one and marked it front port. If you don't do this, it might be almost too easy to swap a wall around, and then you've got a mess that you got to clean up. So when you're building these, make sure you label these pods properly. Now, once you put the tops on the pods, such as with this one, then things will kind of fall into place. Then you'll know which pod goes where. But when you don't have the tops on, it can be very easy to mess these up. If you wanted to, on the instruction sheet, you could probably also mark off when you've got one of the pods assembled, but just keep in mind that it is very easy to mess these up if you're not careful. One other thing I think would be nice is if somebody out there was willing to do some resin or some 3D printing, might be possible to do slightly different wall details to represent, like the Eagle, the second and third 44-inch studio models. This model, to my knowledge, really only builds into the #1 studio model, but that's what most everybody wants to build anyway. But I can see some ways that people can modify these and customize the details to make them look like the other Eagles if they so desire. Now, looking at the top of the pod structure, what this is part of like the carry-through section. So once the pods are built, they would slide into the cage structure right there and go up flush with the cage, go slide into the passenger pod and go flush with the cage. Very, very sturdy. And these pieces right here are also interchangeable, so that they could be used on, just flip them around and they could be used on the other side for a left-hand pod or a right-hand pod. Only minor bit on the test shot was the hole opening for the landing strut was a little too small, so I just had to take a rat tail file and ream that out. And the way it's going to work on the kit is you've got this plate that goes right here. Make sure you use some good quality strong glue for that. And then you got the strut that goes down. Then there's a little flange that allows the strut to not extend any further than that. This piece is going to go like that. And the strut goes there, and of course what also will go in there is a spring, which will allow the landing strut to release tension when you lift the model off. How well it works, I do not know. I'm in the process of trying to get myself some springs that'll work. Since the springs were not ready when I got the test shot, I wasn't able to get any. But I've got a one on some springs that should do the job. I want to make my model spring-loaded, and we'll see how well that works. But in any event, that's where I'm at right now. Next step, I'm going to be painting and outcladding the engine bells, because if any problems occur along the way, I'm going to have to devote a fair amount of time to fixing those issues. But overall, things are going quite swimmingly, and I got to say that even for a first run test shot, this model fits together very, very nice. And it is definitely going to be well worth the money when it gets released a little bit later this year. But so far that's where I am, and tune in for the next video. Not sure when it's going to be. A lot of it depends on how much time I got between now and then. But I should have all the landing gear struts done, hopefully have some of the cage work done, and maybe even some work on the command module, and I'll show you that. In any event, keep on building, buy a lot of these Eagle kits when they come out, and thank you for watching.